Now, whether your bike has rim or disc brakes, you should not have to put up with them squeaking and squealing through your rider, nor should your training partners for that matter. Now, there are some fairly common causes for why your brakes may make these kinds of noises. Today, I'm going to run you through those and how you can sort them. Well, if you're like me, any noise coming from your bike that should not otherwise be there can be infuriating, and probably the most annoying of them all is squealing brakes, and not to mention that's probably also a sign that your brakes aren't working to their full potential. Now, this can happen for a number of reasons. It could be that you've got grease or oil onto the brake pads, onto the rotors, or onto the rims. It could be a misalignment of the braking surfaces. It could also be that they haven't been bed in properly, and so on. Now, there are a number of causes, so I'm going to run through the most common solutions to these and how you can fix these pesky noises, starting with good old rim brakes. Okay, so the first port of call is to make sure that the brake blocks and the braking surfaces are clean and in good condition. Now, the obvious and most simple method is to just clean your bike. Now, you can obviously just focus on the brake blocks and the wheels and that braking surface, or whilst you're at it, you might as well just clean the whole bike. Now, I like to recommend doing almost like a double wash on the braking surfaces. This will just really make sure that you're breaking down the grease and also fully washing the grease away from the surface. However, if you want to save yourself a little bit of time, you can get yourself a bike cleaner, which basically acts a bit like a degreaser. Use that in the same way, and that really makes sure that that has broken that grease down and washed it away. Also really useful if you have actually contaminated that braking surface when you've been using some chain lube or some aerosol lubricant that might have perhaps gone onto that surface. Now, another potential issue for these pesky noises is that the brake pads or brake blocks are in a bad way. Now, what I mean by this is that they may have become glazed over, a little bit like Fraser does when I start talking to him about aero gains and bike parts, or that the brake pads have become unevenly worn. So to do this and check it all over, you want to drop your wheel out, or to not do that, you can actually just release the bolt on the brake block, and then that will allow you to slide that brake pad out. Then pick out any small pieces of grit out of the blocks and use sandpaper if you need to file and smooth away that top layer, especially if they've become glazed over. But also, if the pads are starting to look particularly worn out, then you will need to replace the pads altogether. And you really do want to make sure that you've got plenty left on your pads. Now, a good thing to look for on your pads is those little indents on the inside of the pad. If they're looking like they're starting to disappear or wear out, then you really want to be replacing the pads straight away. But now let's talk about the other braking surface, and by that I mean the rim. Now, if you're using aluminium rimmed wheels, then these are being machined. They've got a slightly rougher finish to the rim, which are brilliant for braking. However, they do wear out with time, particularly if you're not cleaning your wheel or maintaining your wheels quite as regularly as you should have been. See, if you think about it, as they get more greasy, our braking performance decreases. So in turn, we pull the levers even harder and hope that it will slow us down and stop us. Now, that's obviously a lot more force going through that rim, which would have obviously been avoided had we kept on top of cleaning and maintaining the wheel. So unfortunately, you will need to replace or repair the rims of these wheels with time if you spot them wearing out or becoming slightly concave. Now then, if cleaning the brake pads or the braking surfaces doesn't help, then it could be that the brakes aren't actually set up properly. Now, if they're still juddering or squealing, now this is often a sign that the pads aren't actually meeting the rim fully. So what you want to do here is just pull the brake lever back slightly and just look at how the brake pad is aligned with that rim. Now, what you want to be striving for is that pad to sit nicely in the middle of that rim, or within the middle of that braking surface, and also within the correct alignment and angle with that. If it does need adjusting, then you just want to make sure you're pulling that brake lever back slightly, releasing the bolt on the caliper, attaching that brake block to it, and then just realign it and retighten it. But another option with the braking setup is actually to toe the pads in ever so slightly. Now, the pads are normally set up so they're completely parallel with the rim or the braking surface, but by toeing them in, it can actually help to eradicate these noises and issues that we've been talking about. So by toeing in, what happens is then the front part of the brake block actually makes contact with the rim first. Now, a good way to do this is to slot a thin piece of card, maybe a few millimeters thick, or a business card folded over perhaps, into the rear of the brake block. Pull the brake, loosen the brake block, and push the front in a touch to touch the rim. Then tighten the bolt again, and there you go. Failing all of this and you're still experiencing some unusual noises or juddering, then it's worth taking a look at the calipers that the brake blocks are attached to or the wheels themselves. Now some calipers can actually flex a little, or the bolt that attaches the caliper to the frame or to the forks could have worked its way loose. So all of which could contribute to some unwanted play or to these rather annoying noises. But now we've spoken enough about rim brakes, let's talk disc brakes. Now obviously there is a lot of crossover between disc brakes and rim brakes, including keeping them clean. Contaminated, dirty and squealing disc brakes just is not pleasant for anyone. Now first ground rule for you is just to avoid using any lubricant or aerosol lubricant for that matter near disc brakes, and that includes near the rotors and also the pads. But obviously they are going to get dirty with time, so it's really important that we keep on top of cleaning the rotors, and for that I would really recommend getting yourself a disc brake cleaner such as this one. So to use this, you want to make sure that you take the wheel out. You can spray the rotor down whilst it's on the wheel, or for best practice, you can remove the rotor very easily using the correct tool. Allow the degreaser to do its thing and then wipe it down. Now actually a really important thing to note here with the brake cleaners that you really want to avoid getting it anywhere near the disc brake pads. They really don't like it, or any chemical for that matter, including obviously lubricants. If you do get the smallest amount on there, maybe just the tiniest amount of residue, you may get away with just sanding the top layer of the pads off. That'll also help if the pads have become slightly glazed over. However, if the oil or grease has fully soaked into the pads, I'm afraid it's going to be a full pad replacement. Now you may have heard people suggesting popping them in the oven, baking them to remove that grease. Unfortunately, I've not really heard any success in that, and it will be a full pad replacement. Now, another thing to think about with disc brakes is that they'll need bedding in. Now this might sound totally alien if you're coming from rim brakes to disc brakes, but it can actually dramatically improve their performance. So all you need to do is ride along the street at a decent speed and pull firmly and safely on the brakes. Just repeat it over and over until you start to feel your brakes biting more. It's also just good fun when you've got a new bike, or new pads anyway. And similarly to the rim brakes, you want to look at the alignment of the disc brakes. So for this, just want to loosen off the two bolts on the caliper above and below it, and then pull the brake lever and then retighten those two bolts. And that will just help to realign that brake caliper with the rotor really simply. And that normally works really well, but if you need to, you might want to do it by eye and just do the same method and just push it by hand into place and make sure that rotor is sat nice and centrally with an equal distance between both the pads. Now if your brakes are running perfectly well and really smoothly, other than 1 point on them each time the wheel spins around, just hear a slight catch of the rotor, then it's likely you've got a little dink in them or a little bend in them. And unfortunately this happens quite easily with rotors, particularly when we're traveling with them, when we're flying with them, or we're chucking our bikes in the back of a car. But they can also be easily sorted. Now this tool here is great for the job. It's from Park Tool. It's got a couple of different lengths, so I can be really quite precise when I'm putting that onto the rotor, and I can bend it back into place. But you can also use an adjustable spanner too, so don't worry, although maybe not quite so precise and accurate with that adjustment. Now, hopefully by the end of this video, you've got a perfectly quiet bike and well-performing brakes. So if you have and you like this video, then please do hit that thumbs up button. If you'd like to see more videos like this from GTN, then you can also subscribe to the channel. So to do that, just hit the globe icon on screen right now. If you'd like to find out a little bit more about disc brakes and how to maintain them, you can see a video on that by clicking just up here. If you'd like to see disc brakes versus rim brakes and which is faster, you can see that by clicking just down here.